Hi, and welcome back to our frontline training on serving and working with Indigenous clients who have been impacted by the collateral consequences of justice involvement. In this video, we'll explore how friendship centers contribute to the strength and prosperity of urban Indigenous communities, the importance of relationship building when working with Indigenous clients, and how to take a trauma-informed approach to providing services. Friendship centers are vital hubs that provide a range of services to tens of thousands of urban Indigenous community members every day. The centers provide comprehensive wraparound services and programs in various areas including justice, health, family support, long-term care, and more. And it's important to understand the breadth of their work so you can work with your local friendship center most effectively. Let's take a look at some of their work. The first is the Indigenous Court Work Program. This program supports individuals and families in the justice system by helping them understand their rights, options, and responsibilities by advocating for diversions and making referrals to culturally based services. Court workers attend court and act as a liaison between the justice personnel and the client, which can reduce further involvement in the justice system and give those who are involved in the justice system an enhanced understanding of their rights, options, and responsibilities. The second is the Indigenous Community Justice Program. This program aims to reduce Indigenous overrepresentation in the justice system through diversions, community-integrated justice models, and healing plans. The program creates a model of justice that keeps the individual integrated within their community, housed, and maintaining employment. Where an individual successfully completes their healing plan, their charges are withdrawn. The third is the Indigenous Healing and Wellness Program. This program focuses on reducing violence against women, children, and 2S LGBTQIA+ people, and improving health and well-being through cultural programming and collaboration, including peer counseling and anger management workshops. Through this program, families and clients remain safe, family violence experiences are reduced, and there is a better access to health services. The fourth is the Kije Anishinaabe Nin program. Kije Anishinaabe Nin translates to I am a kind man. This program engages Indigenous men and youth in efforts to end violence against women and 2S LGBTQIA+ people through public education and community-based initiatives. Through this program, violence is reduced, support for the healing process around the effects of intergenerational trauma and abuse is increased, and there is an enriched understanding of healthy relationships. The fifth is Gone Away to Win. Gone Away to Win is a Cree word which translates to taking care of each other's spirit. When we are born, spirits are pure and whole, but as we journey through our time on earth, our spirit may encounter abuse or neglect. Gone Away to Win is an initiative that promotes community healing, prevention, and education through a cultural approach to addressing the abuse of women and protecting the spirit. And finally, the Ganahanyuk Prosperity Research Project. This project shifts the focus from poverty reduction to understanding prosperity from a community-driven perspective, reflecting on how reciprocity and relationships contribute to well-being. Ganahanyuk, which means giving thanks, reflects a social norm that calls for mindfulness in everyday life, reflecting on and respecting one's relationships in the broadest sense of the word. What results from the Ganahanyuk is an understanding about how the energy of reciprocity is a necessary and active component within prosperous communities. As we will learn later in this module, it is essential to emphasize the strengths of urban Indigenous communities rather than using deficit-based language and thinking. The Ganahanyuk Prosperity Research Project exemplifies this shift by focusing on prosperity and well-being as opposed to poverty reduction. The Ontario Federation of Indigenous Friendship Centres envisions systems that are locally responsive and anti-colonial, honoring Indigenous ways of being and responding to community priorities. Institutional leaders must work collaboratively with urban Indigenous communities to disrupt and dismantle colonial systems by supporting Indigenous infrastructure, co-developing responsive public policies and services, and shifting public perceptions of Indigenous knowledge. Breaking down barriers and developing sustainable solutions to deep-rooted systemic issues can only be achieved in full partnership with Friendship Center communities. The Urban Indigenous Action Plan is a policy framework designed to help the public sector create policies and programs that better meet the needs of urban and rural Indigenous communities. Developed collaboratively by provincial Indigenous organizations, the Ministry of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation, and informed by diverse voices, including service providers and the private sector, the Urban Indigenous Action Plan outlines principles and steps for building relationships between government and Indigenous organizations by encouraging transparency, open communication, and mutual respect, and engaging Indigenous communities by involving Indigenous governments and organizations in the planning, design, and evaluation of programs and services, ensuring responsiveness and adaptability to community needs. The successes of collaborative relationships that include Indigenous knowledge and/or cultural-based perspectives depends on the quality of the relationship and the cultural awareness level of external parties. If relationships don't exist or aren't actively being built, it's easy for the process to take on a clinical feel, which results in community and participants feeling isolated. This is something you should keep in mind while working with Indigenous clients, and make sure you are taking steps to deepen your cultural awareness to promote stronger, more meaningful relationships. Let's take a look at a few examples of this relationship building at work and its real community impact. When it comes to housing and homelessness, the Anishinaabe-Gamik Supportive Housing Program has demonstrated significant cost savings and positive outcomes in housing stability. Under this model, a service manager or municipality identifies, buys, and donates or sells at a discount a property to a local Friendship Center or Ontario Aboriginal Housing Services, who then builds and manages the property in collaboration with the Friendship Center, which provides programming in the housing. Another example is the Indigenous Human Rights Program. This initiative, in collaboration with Pro Bono Students Canada, addresses discrimination experienced by Indigenous people in the retail sector and empowers individuals through public legal education, including outlining rights and responsibilities while shopping and expectations of retailers. Another example is the Indigenous Human Rights Clinics, which also operate as part of the Indigenous Human Rights Program. Through these clinics, anti-Indigenous racism and discrimination can be tackled by working with Friendship Centers to build knowledge about human rights among urban Indigenous communities and to empower individuals to make decisions about their rights by sharing information about the law and mainstream legal processes. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, UNDRIP, was adopted in 2007 and endorsed by Canada in 2010. Among other things, it affirms the right of Indigenous self-determination, self-government, and cultural identity. With the majority of Indigenous people residing in urban and rural areas, urban Indigenous communities and organizations, like Friendship Centers, are critical to the actualization of UNDRIP. It's also essential when building and sustaining these collaborative relationships to address often overlooked negative behaviors or comments that convey hostile or derogatory messages. These can be covert and can occur on a daily basis. This looks like repeating or affirming stereotypes about Indigenous peoples, positioning Indigenous culture as abnormal, assuming all Indigenous people are the same, and minimizing the existence of discrimination. People who experience these may feel anger, frustration, or exhaustion from feeling that they must represent their group or suppress their own cultural expression and beliefs. But recognizing and addressing these behaviors is crucial to fostering an inclusive environment and for relationship building. In the realm of criminal justice and policing, Indigenous peoples frequently report feeling over-policed and overly scrutinized, while also experiencing underprotection when they are victims of crime. For example, there have been instances of inadequate responses to missing persons cases and perceptions of Indigenous individuals as aggressors rather than victims. Addressing these disparities is vital for building trust and ensuring equitable treatment. But how can we do that? Making unintentional mistakes is normal. But when these actions cause harm, we must move from mere apologies to actionable, transformational change. Listening, reflecting, and identifying ways we can improve our actions in the future are essential. To unlearn these actions and behaviors, we need to become better educated, hold ourselves accountable, and actively listen to Indigenous peoples to fulfill our roles and responsibilities to each other, the land, and our relationships. This is where trauma-informed practices may play an important role in the relationship building and collaboration. When working with equity-deserving groups like Indigenous peoples, it's crucial to use trauma-informed practices in order to build meaningful relationships. These practices foster safety, trust, collaboration, choice, and empowerment. Creating trauma-informed environments is key to initiating and sustaining meaningful relationships and partnerships with Indigenous communities. When a river is left to its own devices, it is inclined to find the path of least resistance. If our lives were completely free from trauma, we may have a path of little resistance. However, when the river experiences a blockage, it will divert around the obstacle. In our lives, when we experience trauma, our brains try to divert around the obstacle, and we can experience normal responses to abnormal events. As children, we create ways to survive these abnormal events, which save our life. As we grow, we hold on to those coping mechanisms and continue to use them when they aren't needed. Trauma-informed practices are essential for understanding and addressing the impacts of trauma. Jane Middleton Moss defines trauma-informed practices as understanding the negative effects that occur when children and adults are or have been exposed to trauma in their lives. Using a trauma-informed lens means that a person is aware of trauma's impacts, and applying this lens, we can shift the focus from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. Reframing it and taking this approach helps create a supportive environment that acknowledges and addresses trauma's effects. It can also help organizations and communities build trauma-informed practices into their work. This can look like creating and promoting Indigenous spaces within institutions designed by and for Indigenous peoples, advocating through collaboration and relationship building with clients, service users, and Indigenous organizations, focusing on the existing strength of clients and building on that strength to promote resiliency. As Ranjan Datta stated, a love of learning will give us the courage to relearn the diverse meanings of reconciliation from an Indigenous perspective. This involves challenging colonial attitudes, advocating for change, and reflecting on when our actions are helpful and when they interfere. These are things you can keep in mind when building relationships with the Friendship Center in your area and when serving Indigenous clients in your work. Think about how the work of the Friendship Centers intersect with yours, how you build and maintain relationships, and how you can collaborate to ensure your clients are receiving holistic care and supports.